is Sam. I'm the CEO of Amplified.ai. I'm based in Tokyo, so we started the company in Japan. And today I'm going to talk about driving digital transformation and what it's been like starting a B2B SaaS company in Japan with great customers here, but also global customers. So just very briefly, as already kind of described, Amplified is a fast and easy to use AI tool that helps you to develop ideas and patents by searching and tracking inventions. And we cover about 120 million patents in that. But I'm really not here today to talk to you about the product Amplified. I want to talk more about the company, Amplified. So we launched our product actually very recently, although the company's been around for a little while. We started as mainly an AI research firm. We launched the product just a few months ago. We now have users from more than 28 countries and paying business customers in Japan, Europe, and the US. About half of our team is located in Japan, where we began. And actually, my co-founder, Yasu, has a PhD from Tohoku University. And when we began Amplified, he was living in Sendai. So it's a fun little connection that we have here. It's a great time to be an entrepreneur in Japan. And it's especially a good time to be involved in B2B SaaS, to be working on anything around digital transformation. And I wanted to kind of set that stage by first just sort of mentioning there's this interesting perception of Japan. I think it's different from outside and from inside Japan, but there's this perception that, Japan is kind of, on one hand, the land of fax machines and these archaic paper-based, business processes that just refuse to go away, where kind of Windows 95 or Windows 2000 and Internet Explorer still live and are doing well. But on the other hand, Japan produces some of the most advanced technology in the world, punches way above its weight on manufacturing and scientific research, and it's a global leader in advanced technology toilets. So there's this sort of mixed perception of Japan, and especially right now, a lot of the sort of older habits are very, very quickly changing. And we can sort of see this looking at SaaS. So there's some really wonderful work done by the folks over at One Capital, putting together some chaos maps of horizontal and vertical SaaS companies. And you can just see from the volume here, there are a lot of them. Japan is a really large market for SaaS. And it's also a relatively newer market in a lot of ways. There's a lot of adoption of foreign SaaS products in the Japanese market, but it kind of started a bit later than in the US and Europe. So in some ways, it's a bit easier to compete here than it is in the more crowded, kind of matured SaaS markets like the US. There's also a very concentrated business environment. So it's easy to work with a lot of different companies in a relatively small geographic region. And Japanese companies now are very open to having virtual meetings, which has really made things move a lot faster than it used to move, where you had to book meetings, 2 weeks in advance, a month in advance, and then go in person. The early stage investment ecosystem in Japan is very strong. There's a whole lot of information on this online, so I won't bore you with all of it. But there are some really amazing investors out there that have experience investing in startups, really understand startup investing, or are operators themselves. And we're also seeing people who have done startups, have been successful. We're seeing a lot of the companies on the screen here that were kind of pioneering early SaaS startups that are now more mature businesses. And so that's created just a lot of talent that's available. And finally, there's a kind of a top-down push right now, in particular in Japan, for digital transformation. And that starts with things like fax machines and changing the paper invoice process, but it's also kind of creating a broader shift that makes it much easier to talk to companies and potential customers about using kind of a new process, changing and more digitalizing their businesses. So with kind of the stage set there and some of that background made available, I just wanted to talk through, I guess, a little bit of our journey that we've been on as Amplified, coming as a global company from day one, but really starting in Japan and some of the considerations. So in our case, we knew that we wanted to build a global product, and we had to sort of look at some different challenges of doing that out of Japan. On one hand, the cultural kind of communication and norms in Japan are a little bit different in the business environment than the US. I would say they're more different than like the US and Europe. But you know, it's something that if you're just kind of sensitive to it, I think you don't need to actually speak Japanese necessarily to overcome it. I've seen a lot of success working with Japanese businesses for us. Although I personally speak Japanese, we've been able to have engineers in Australia have good conversations with engineers in Japan at companies and work together and collaborate. And so it's more just about, I think for that, having a sensitivity to the fact that things are a little bit different and just kind of being aware of what you might not know. The other consideration is, especially for SaaS and business in Japan, really understanding your buyers and your users. And this is kind of a point that's true really anywhere in the world. It's not unique to Japan, but in the context of Japan, oftentimes you're going to have a very, very different buyer than a user. There can be a more complicated kind of approval process to buy a piece of technology, a software product. And so you really kind of have to not only take the time to understand your users at those companies, how are they using the product, what problems are they solving, what's their motivation, what's in it for them, but also how do you help them kind of convince up the chain, and what are the motivations for the people who control the budget process. And then the other thing that we had to kind of think about and struggle with a little bit is, do we localize our product or do we globalize it? And I don't think there's a right answer here. You can do both. So it can be a really strong advantage to be a really localized product in Japan. Being able to, if you're located here, being able to provide fast service in Japanese in the same time zone in a way that really meets kind of cultural expectations while also delivering, a world-class product, that can be very powerful, and that can be very hard for a competitor to replicate. So, on one hand, it can be an advantage to really start from a very strong, very localized product. On the other hand, it can be challenging because it's a lot of work when you're a resource-strapped startup to build a product that's really designed for a Japanese user, and then after it's kind of everything's baked in and you've laid the foundation and you've kind of poured concrete, have to kind of go take a look at that and say, does this work for a global audience? Are they going to use it the same way? It's not just a matter of, do we, change the interface from Japanese to English? Like, is this have the right assumptions baked in? And so there's an argument to be made that, you could benefit from kind of thinking a little bit about getting a more global set of users from day one and trying to balance between the two. In our case, just to share kind of what we did, we went to be a global product from day one. So about 80% of our beta testers were Japanese, but we did have about 20% from the rest of the world. And we kind of tried to balance between the two of those. And we actually built our first prototype for our Japanese customers in English, believe it or not. They were happy with it. We used as little language as possible in the interface and just tried to give them something that got the job done for what they needed, but didn't need as much of the kind of language-based interface. They could do it with pictures, with visuals. And that ended up being a real powerful factor for us with the global market, because it made localization easier in other markets, but it also kind of forced us to build a more intuitive user interface. And our product being about patents, which are there's a lot of language in patents, they're very complicated. It's been a real advantage for us to have an intuitive, simple user interface that anyone can really navigate through. So with those considerations kind of laid out, just wanted to get into some of the challenges that we've seen. I've mentioned that it's a great time to be an entrepreneur in Japan, that there's wide talent pool, there's investment opportunities. The customers here are really great to work with, business customers. But there are challenges, and in the interest of sort of sharing some of those, one is it is a long sales cycle here, and the more enterprise you go, the more that becomes painful. But even with smaller companies in Japan, where the budget size is not that big, it can still be a long sales cycle. And also we found that kind of the business buyers are generally more demanding in Japan than they are elsewhere. So if you're kind of a new, unproven product, it can take a little time to really get to that critical mass of social proof, or to overcome their kind of expectations for what it takes for the product to be good enough to use. The flip side of that is they're usually very willing to work with you on those things. And so they'll tell you what that barrier is and help guide you towards that. But it can take a while. And that can be a tough position to be in. In general, we've sort of found that companies are not as willing or as able to change processes easily. So if you're doing something kind of new or kind of different and it requires them to change how they operate, just be aware that that's going to be tough. That's going to be a challenge. That's going to take a lot of thought and a lot of discussion. On the flip side of that is they're usually much more willing to try tools. So if it's just kind of a technology change and it doesn't require a big kind of organizational process change, that's a good thing. And kind of some other challenges are just sort of understanding the needs and overcoming objections. So with working with Japanese business buyers, it can be a little bit difficult sometimes to figure out what the real objection is. And all of these are kind of global truths. They're true in any case around the world, but it's a different, there's a slightly different way of communicating what the needs are and what the objections are. It's not always as obvious right up front, and part of this is kind of just the consensus decision making, that you might not have one person who can just really clearly tell you what the whole team thinks about. So it takes a little time. You have to let them kind of sort through everything and come back to you with what sort of the team thinks the needs are and the objections are. There are very high expectations for service and support, so that's another thing that's just kind of to be aware of. They can be a little more demanding in that respect than you might see in other countries around the world. And finally, just understanding local compliance and regulations. If you're not used to this, can seem daunting. This actually isn't really so much of a challenge. I actually kind of wanted to put it on this slide just to point out how easy it is these days. There's so much support available. Jetro has a whole sort of office set up to help with this. There's things like IGNITE Sendai. There are conferences. There are accelerators. There's really a lot of support out there to make this easy, whether you speak Japanese or not. And the last thing that I was going to talk about a little bit here is just some of the benefits. Now that I've laid out the challenges, just to come back to working with businesses in Japan is really wonderful because they're very loyal. If you do build that relationship and establish it, you have customers that are going to stick by you, including in challenging times. Some of our customers have been hit really hard by the global pandemic, and it's really impacted their financial situation. And we've been incredibly lucky that they have continued to work with us. We haven't been dropped to the side as a result of that, even though we're a relatively new purchase for them. They stand by their word on that. So it is a really great place to build that up. And it's become an advantage for us globally, because we can go and compete with some other companies that do similar things to what we do in their markets much more easily than they can come and try to build something out of nothing in Japan. Their also benefit is what I mentioned on the last slide a little bit about being willing to try new tools. Just in general, compared to even just 2 years ago, the willingness to try new tools, IT department policy changing, being much more open to buying cloud services, just everything's gotten so much easier to approach a company. There are more ways to get connected to them, and they're generally just much more willing to talk to you. So it's a lot easier to get started. And finally, there's just a motivation to change things right now. And in Japan, kind of change can be very slow. It can be frustratingly slow sometimes, but when it happens, it's often very, very fast. And at least my personal opinion is that's kind of what we're seeing right now in Japan, for a number of reasons. Is there's just kind of become a critical mass, a critical appetite for change. And so there's a willingness, there's a younger generation of people that have kind of grown up with very modern, like mobile-based app experiences, and they want that in their business software lives. They want to improve the processes that they're using. They want to improve the technology. There's all kinds of other drivers, like an aging population, that mean they have to be more efficient. And so all of this together really makes Japan a very interesting place to be doing B2B SaaS, to be doing digital transformation. And at least for Amplified, this has been something that's helped us build a business, not just in Japan, but really go to the rest of the world.